Unless you're willing to lose sight of the shore, then you never sail into something new. Innovation and creativity, they thrive on difference. They're like an atom smasher. You need different points of view to collide so that you can discover something new. You need an environment for that to happen where taking risks is seen as something productive instead of dangerous and destructive. You don't want things to devolve into a culture that makes all its decisions based on fear and status quo, because then nothing new emerges. Unless you're willing to fail, unless that is a possibility, then you never get to anything new.
Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where leadership meets real-world insights. In each episode, you can eavesdrop on exclusive conversations with top thought leaders, best-selling authors, and experts in leadership, communication, relationships, culture, and everything else that shapes your effectiveness in the workplace and in your personal life. Leadership is here for you. Now, here's our host, himself a seasoned coach and best-selling author, Dr. Roger Dean Duncan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where we explore the ideas, mindsets, and systems that shape extraordinary leadership. In this episode, we'll talk about something we all crave and sometimes quietly avoid at the same time: growth. My guest is Ben Swire, author of the book Safe Danger, an unexpected method for sparking connection, finding purpose, and inspiring innovation. Ben challenges the idea that safety and risk are opposites. Instead, he invites us into a powerful tension where meaningful connection, real purpose, and true innovation live. We'll explore why playing it safe often costs us more than we realize, how leaders can create environments where people dare to speak, experiment, and belong, and why the most human moments at work often feel a little uncomfortable. If you're leading people, teams, or even just yourself, and you sense there's more possible, this conversation might stretch you in exactly the right way. Ben Swire, welcome to Leadership.
Thanks, Roger. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, Ben, let's start with some background. Please tell us a bit about your personal history, why you founded an organization called Make Believe Works, and how that led to your writing your book.
Well, my current career path does feel a bit like God's joke on me, because I am a deep introvert. I have a wide variety of things in my background, and while Make Believe Works is about leading team building workshops, I personally have always loathed team building. So it is an odd path for me to have been on. But it all started when I started working at a design firm called IDEO that is known for many, many things. But one of the things it's most famous for is its internal culture. And I had gone there from Wall Street, from the financial marketing world. So it was very much going from sort of Kansas into Oz, if you'll forgive the Kansas reference, in that it was a workplace that was really fueled by trust and connection rather than incentives or fear. And that was something entirely new to me, to be in a place that was really fueled by what I hoped my life could be fueled by, as opposed to a distraction from it or a temporary diversion. And I'm a curious person. I have a background in philosophy and psychology and art, and I sort of spent some time looking around and trying to figure out how this place was able to do world-class work while being so kind to each other. And I noticed that the key thing there was trust, that these were people that trusted each other to have each other's backs, not stab them in it. They felt comfortable offering up half-baked ideas with the confidence that people would take them and make them better, rather than judging them and dismissing them and passing them over for promotions.
It's interesting that trust is required in every kind of relationship, every kind of environment. It's always necessary. Well, let me ask, Ben, what does safe danger mean, and why did you choose that phrase for your book title?
Yeah, well, safe danger, most people think of safety and danger as opposites, but over time, I've really come to see them a bit more like dance partners, in that safety gives us solid footing and balance, But danger gives us motion and movement and purpose. And if we only chase after safety, we stagnate. And if we only chase after danger, we burn out. So safe danger, the way I think of it, is the sort of emotional sweet spot between the two, where people feel secure enough to leave security behind, but still stretched enough to grow. And that's really where I've seen connection and creativity and belonging really thrive.
Your metaphor of dance partners, I think, is perfect. That really clarifies things. So why do humans seem wired to avoid danger, even when it might help them grow?
I think to a great degree, we can blame our brains. I think society has evolved faster than biology, and we're wired to look out for things that are going to cause us damage and to keep ourselves safe. The problem with that is that in our society, we're no longer just worried about saber-toothed tigers. We're worried about emotional fulfillment and connection with the people that we love and showing up for them. And so that leaning towards safety, towards comfort especially, I think can keep us locked away, can cost us a lot of what we hope to be as a person.
Yeah, missed opportunities.
Yeah. And that's, that is one of the reasons that I ended up actually writing this into a book, because it was all based on my own relationship and growth and experiences with fear, with risk. I was someone that leaned very much on control as a way to stay safe. I was the person who had it all figured out ahead of time because that way I knew what was coming and I could be safe. But over time, working with really insightful, innovative, interesting people, I realized that they were doing something differently. And I realized that safety, when it becomes rigid, really can turn into a cage. That armor that protects us also keeps us from growing. And it keeps those soft spots just as soft and just as afraid. And I saw it in myself, and I saw it in the teams that I worked with, that there were these brilliant people who were playing small because the culture they were in rewarded caution over courage.
So what makes danger safe rather than reckless?
Intention. I think that really is a key piece of it. Safe danger, when I think of it, has guardrails. It has clear values that you're working towards. It has a foundation of psychological safety. It's got recovery systems built in so that, recklessness, I think, is danger without structure. It's often taking risks for the sake of taking risks. Whereas safe danger is structured vulnerability. You're jumping, but there's a net. So it's not so much about being reckless. It's about being honest with what growth actually requires.
Right. I had a wonderful conversation recently with Dr. Amy Edmondson, who's credited with coining the phrase psychological safety.
I'm a big fan.
And she talked a lot about her work. And it was interesting that one of the characteristics of psychological safety is that people find that it's okay to make a mistake. They know they're not going to be hammered for it. That's part of growth, and it becomes part of the culture. So that kind of leads to my next question is, and maybe you've answered it, but I'll give you a chance to elaborate. Is safe danger a mindset, a practice, or a culture, or all three?
I have found it to be all three as I've evolved with it and grown and seen it in place. I think it is all three, but in that order. It starts as a mindset shift. I think there's a moment of recognizing that discomfort isn't the enemy. And that takes some time to really settle in and to be okay with. But to do that, it has to become a practice. There are small experiments in vulnerability. You have to dip a toe into the water. You have to see that it's okay to take this risk, it is safe, and that you can continue doing it. And then with enough practice, then it becomes a culture because the people around you feel safe and encouraged and they see what you're bringing to the table. And then it becomes something that everybody begins to expect and hope for and thrive in. But you can't skip straight to culture from this. That's one of the things I have seen with the clients that come to us or just, working with, how do we get to, we need to trust each other fast. How do we become 17% more trusting in 1 hour? Yeah. And it's a hard truth to share with people that, want to hire me. But the fact is, it's not a light switch. It takes work. It takes thought. It takes practice. And so that's one of the pieces that can be frustrating especially in a corporate culture, which is quarterly based and annual reward based and all of that, which is KPIs don't really function in the same way. You can't say, look at our trust scores from, between ourselves this year and last year. It's different. It's about building a practice.
Some leaders, I think, make the mistake of assuming that culture can be installed like a new air conditioning system. And it can't be installed. It needs to evolve. And part of that evolution, I believe, and I think you would agree with this, requires some very explicit conversations about here's what we're going to do, here's what we don't want to do, how did this work for you? You got to talk about things. And then the culture evolves. And if you're smart about it, it will evolve into a culture that will get you more. So let's talk briefly about vulnerability. We hear a lot about that these days. Why does vulnerability often feel dangerous? In fact, a lot of people seem to think that vulnerability is a synonym for danger, even with people we trust.
Yes, absolutely. I think, vulnerability means really going against the tide that we've been swimming in since middle school, essentially, when the crush of conformity really kicks in and all of the edges that make us start to get sanded down. And I think to be vulnerable is to start to reclaim some of the parts of ourselves that we have been told we must hide, to be loved, to be successful, to be important, to be respected. And sometimes that is true, depending on who you've surrounded yourself with. There are people that will snap to judgment, that will step on you, that will do all that. I think it comes to a question of who do you want to be surrounded by? Who do you want in your life? Do you want to be seen for who you are or who people expect you to be? Because at some point in your life, you're going to look back and say, I've spent my whole time living somebody else's life.
Right.
Being who I've been told to be. And so vulnerability, I think, is scary. But it's also an invitation. It's an invitation to step into your own shoes and to see how that feels and to be okay with some people not liking you in exchange for being loved for the people that actually matter to you. When I was first writing my book, there was a moment when I was just terrified of putting this out into the world because of my own insecurities. The night it was due, I genuinely had a moment of, I can't turn this in. I should just scrap it. And a friend of mine who I deeply respect basically said what he had found was that he'd found comfort in this phrase, that he was trying to please his fans rather than convince his critics. And I took that to heart. I thought, okay, there are people out there that want to hear whatever it is that you might have to say. And if you speak to them and you give them what they're hungry for and what they need, the rest can follow or not. It's their choice. But that does mean getting vulnerable in a way that is scary.
Well, Ben, in building real relationships, what role does discomfort play? You kind of touched on that.
Yeah.
Elaborate a little bit.
I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see businesses and friends and even families make is confusing safety with comfort. Comfort is about making it easy for everyone to fit in, which is lovely. But real safety is when people can stand out and still belong. So real safety isn't about removing that friction, removing that discomfort. It's about creating enough trust that the discomfort and the friction is productive and that it lights up the possibilities that would have been missed otherwise.
There's something in our society that makes that very tough for a lot of people. People, if they're confronted, to use a phrase, if they're confronted by someone who has a different viewpoint, they, rather than want to understand and engage, they want to go to battle.
Absolutely.
And that's not good anywhere, at any time, for either party.
It's not. And yet it is, I think, I would say 99% of people's default is to look at it as a battle and either give up immediately and say, fine, you think what you want, I'm leaving, or to fight it out and try to win. I think one of the things that I found from the people I admire most is that they don't try to win an argument. They try to win over the person they're speaking with. And they do that not by shouting their own point of view louder, but rather by being curious. by taking
Sure.
the time to really understand the motivations, the why beneath the other person's point of view, because therein you start to find the fears that are motivating them, the history that is proving to them that this is right, the aspirations that are driving their necessity to believe that this is true. And when you begin to pull those apart, you can start to find common ground and say, you know what? We're both concerned with the same thing. Why are we seeing this from different points of view? And at the very least, you start to understand how they're going to hear you, because you know what matters to them.
And winning over doesn't necessarily mean the other person is going to agree with you.
Absolutely not.
And that's okay.
It's okay. It's okay that everybody has their own point of view. I think the hardest thing about being curious is genuinely being open to you being convinced yourself.
Yeah.
Because that's really the only way to be honestly curious and to be open and to talk to somebody who you know at the Thanksgiving dinner table when, Uncle Sam is saying something that you deeply disagree with. If you really want to understand him, you got to be open to the idea that I'm going to be won over by him. I got to give him the chance that I'm asking for from him.
You might ask a question like, Uncle Sam, help me understand how you got to that. And don't say it in a way that challenges and you're looking for a gotcha moment.
Exactly.
But you just really want to understand. Again, you may not agree with him, but at least you understand the path that led him to his conclusion.
Yeah. And I think real understanding is different than just knowing what somebody else is going to say.
Right.
And that's a distinction that I think, especially these days, has just been totally flattened out.
Well, and that goes back to the importance of listening well and listening to understand, not to prepare your rebuttal. So, which is hard for a lot of people.
Well, it's hard, and we've been conditioned to answer as quickly as possible, as smartly as possible, as insightfully as possible, and,
Right.
To pause and say, let me think about that, or I'm not sure. Are things that we've been taught are signals that show weakness, that show incompetence, that show that you're not ready to be followed, to be admired. And in fact, they're just being human. They're just engaging in the moment as opposed to regurgitating the things you've said in the past to somebody else.
Your change initiative has the budget. The strategy looks solid, and everyone's nodding along in the meetings. But for some reason, it's going nowhere. Dr. Roger Dean Duncan knows why. After 40 years in the trenches with top business leaders, he knows that change fails when organizations lack the right foundations: trust, accountability, and real communication. Dr. Duncan's free 10-minute assessment shows you exactly where your organization stands. Answer a few straightforward questions that reveal your true change readiness level. Don't waste months discovering the hard way. Get your free assessment today at leadershop.net/change. Again, that's leadershop.net/change.
Well, you have a lot of experience in organizations. Tell us from your experience, what happens to teams that never experience safe danger? And they're out there.
For sure. I think, avoiding risk, feels safe for a lot of companies and a lot of leaders, but it leads to a dead end.
Stagnation.
It leads to stagnation, for sure. On the one hand, I think, when people stay away from risk and conflict, they think that those sort of things have gone away, when in fact they've just gone underground.
Right.
People nod politely in meetings, but they resist in private. They disagree to each other in circles, and that kind of silence.
They'll have their own conversations out in the employee parking lot.
Right, which immediately corrodes trust more than any open disagreement ever could. But I think the real thing, as you said, is it does lead to stagnation. I think innovation and creativity, they thrive on difference. They're like an atom smasher. You need different points of view to collide so that you can discover something new. You need an environment for that to happen where taking risks is seen as something productive instead of dangerous and destructive. You don't want things to devolve into a culture that makes all its decisions based on fear and status quo, because then nothing new emerges.
Right. So how does safe danger help people find purpose, not only in the workplace, but in their personal lives?
So I think some people are really lucky and have found a sense of purpose early on, and that's wonderful. My experience is, as I said, I feel like most of us are living someone else's life, that we're following expectations that we inherited instead of choices that we made ourselves. And I think that safe danger, when it's practiced authentically, when we really take the time to examine our own fears and our hesitations and where they're coming from and what causes us, what it is that we want to hide and why we want to hide it, I feel that that pain can often be a compass needle that points to purpose. I think the experience that make us us, it's knowledge that's often hard-earned through challenging times. How many times have we heard creators and movie makers and storytellers say, I wish I'd had this as a kid, but I didn't, so I've made it. I've made it into the world for other people, so they have it. And I feel like the safe danger dynamic allows us to reflect on ourselves a little bit more honestly and find where we really have insights that other people might be missing. I have all my life had clinical depression. It's one of those things that I kept quiet and kept to myself for most of my life until I went to IDEO and suddenly found that sharing that became a really useful way of drawing out new insights for how to get people that are hesitant to engage, how to help them engage, what it is that their stumbling blocks were, what it is that they needed in order to feel welcomed and safe. And I knew that inside out because I had lived it.
Sure. And when you talked about it, it made it even more helpful to you rather than harmful.
It made it helpful to me. It helped others both understand me and understand themselves a bit where there was overlap. It encouraged them to share their experiences with me, which then brought me new insight. And ultimately, we were able to take all of these pieces and really build it into something meaningful. And that's, you asked about the work that we do. And as I said, it is a little bit of God's joke on me, and that the way I seem to have been built is antithetical to what I do with my days. But it is also the most rewarding and most purposeful period of my life that I've ever had, because I really feel like I'm stepping into a role that I wish somebody had performed for me earlier on. I wish somebody had shown me how to show up as myself.
So what's the connection between safe danger and courage? It took courage for you to talk about your clinical depression.
It did, I suppose. Courage is one of those words that I tend to shy away from because it comes with such baggage, judgmental baggage. You're a courage or you're a coward.
Okay.
And for me, I don't, courage isn't necessarily the absence of fear. We've heard that on various bumper stickers. It's choosing growth despite the fear. And I think everybody needs to be the hero of their own story. But that doesn't mean that you have to fight dragons every single day. It can just mean that you take a small, brave daily step, the step of being yourself in a world that is designed for conformity. It's facing that fear and not letting it hold you back. That's where you really get to grow. And that's where you learn that the fear is unfounded 9 times out of 10.
So maybe the better word, again, would be vulnerability. What's the connection between them?
Yeah, vulnerability, curiosity, I think. A quick example of safe danger from just my own life as a parent. When my daughter was 5, she looked up at those playground rings and she really wanted to go across them like the bigger kids were, but she was terrified. It felt like a really long way down. And so she just kept getting up there and then getting down, getting up and walking away. And finally, I just took her to the middle of it. I lifted her up and made sure she had a solid grip. And then I just asked her to do the scary thing on purpose. And I told her to let go. After a little bit of convincing, she did. She dropped, she crumpled, she popped back up. And I said, look, that's as bad as it gets. That's the worst case.
Yeah.
So if that is too much for you, now you know the rings aren't for you. If it's okay, have at it. And from then on, she didn't hesitate because she knew 2 things. She knew what failure felt like and that she could survive it. And I think that's what safe danger can allow you to do. Lean into that vulnerability, that courage, that curiosity, is that it makes those small, real risks manageable.
So with that metaphor with your daughter, it sounds like you're saying again that innovation is impossible without safe danger. Real growth is impossible unless you take some risks.
Unless you're willing to fail, unless that is a possibility, then you never get to anything new. Unless you're willing to lose sight of the shore, then you never sail into something new. I think that's, as I said, earlier, or alluded to, in a culture which is based on annual bonuses and quarterly KPIs and all of that, that can be a very hard approach to take, because the urgency of deadlines pushes the curiosity aside. The time and money that it takes to be open to innovation, to be curious about what haven't we looked at yet? What are we considering to be obvious that we should take apart and really think through? What questions haven't we asked? To take the time to do that, to invest the money to explore that, with the possibility that it's not going to lead anywhere, is a hard case to make. But it's also the only way you get anywhere new.
So when you're working with an organization, and you've worked with many, what signals tell you that that organization's culture, at least in the moment, is too safe to innovate? What are the telltale signs? One of them would certainly be people are not willing to step up to the hard conversations.
Absolutely. If there's too much agreement,
right,
that's a pretty big sign. If everybody thinks that we all think the same, that's a pretty good sign that this place needs to be shaken up. If no one has been surprised in a meeting in a month by something someone else has said or suggested, then people aren't taking the risks, because I guarantee you there are people in that room that have thought of things that are unconventional, that they've thought of questions that would be disruptive, and they have chosen not to share them.
At least not in that meeting.
Not in that meeting, not in the open way.
Right.
I think, the cultures that I see that lean the best into that are ones that have built in a way to recognize, to think about, and to appreciate, for lack of a better word, failure. I know lots of people don't like that word. They tend to come up with other euphemisms for it. But for me, that's what we're scared of. So that's the word I use. But to be able to see failure not as a disaster, but as a learning opportunity. To say to somebody, not so much, why did you think this would work? But what did we learn from this? And how can we do it better the next time? To pull it apart, to really understand that. To have postmortems on things that didn't work that aren't about blame, but rather about learning. The cultures that encourage that make it okay for people to say, I really made assumptions here that I shouldn't have, and we shouldn't make going forward. Yeah. What I needed to do was this, this, and this. This is why it went wrong, and this is how we will never do this again as a department. Most places are really good at celebrating employees for what they do and for rewarding them for what they do. But very few are really good at acknowledging them for who they are and what they bring to the table as a full person, not just the roles and resumes. And creating a space where people feel comfortable asking tough questions, pushing boundaries, taking risks, makes a difference.
I've seen good leaders who actually celebrate. On the surface, it might look like they're celebrating failure, but in fact, they're celebrating the success of having these explicit, honest, open conversations where people are challenging each other's thinking. And I've seen leaders in a meeting say, now, before we dismiss here, let's talk about what Bob just did. Bob challenged my thinking on this particular issue. That gave somebody else an idea, or maybe courage, to pipe in and look at the solution we came up with, because Bob was willing to, in your phrase, practice safe danger.
Absolutely.
So be explicit about that. That's part of building culture, to acknowledge those moments.
Absolutely. Those sort of leaders are so few and far between, and yet they are effective, they are change agents, and they're beloved. That's the other piece. When you start looking at loyalty and connections between people and who people are willing to follow from organization to organization or within an organization, or who they admire, it's leaders like that that really allow for all ends of the spectrum to be valuable, the successes and the failures, that welcome challenges. I had a colleague who was a VP at a tech firm, and she at some point realized that her division, they weren't being open and they weren't taking risks with what they were even saying, much less what they were doing. So she started her weekly meetings by just talking about a mistake that she'd made over the past week and what she'd learned from it. Sometimes it was dumb stuff, like I put salt instead of sugar in the recipe. Other times it was important stuff at business, at work. But what it did was signal to everybody that this was a culture of learning and not a culture where everyone was expected to be perfect. Because if you create a culture where everyone is expected to be perfect, then there's just an axe hanging over everybody's head all the time. And any deviation from that isn't rewarded, isn't worthwhile. But I think exactly what you're saying, acknowledging, celebrating, opening up for curiosity, for that sort of thing, having a leader name it explicitly makes all the difference.
So you're talking about introducing safe danger in the culture explicitly. And the example I gave you a minute ago about that particular leader, that was at a nuclear power station. At one of the most highly regulated environments on the planet. And he was a superb leader. And oh, by the way, his particular nuclear site had all of the highest ratings in the industry. And his people were no more qualified or smart than people at other nuclear stations, but they had a culture that they talked about very explicitly, and it made all the difference in the world. What it did, it made all those smart people smarter. That's exactly what it did.
Absolutely. I think great leaders don't only reward answers, they reward better questions, because that's where the hidden risks live and the new opportunities come out.
Yeah. Well, one final question here. What would leadership look like if safe danger were the norm? We've talked a little bit about that. Wrap it up for us. What would it look like if it were the norm?
I think if it's the norm, it's a place where uncertainty is normalized, where it's okay and it's safe to laugh, to be thoughtful, to take your time, to challenge the obvious and to say, let's pause here and not take this as an assumption. Let's go a little bit deeper. I think if it's the norm, I think you end up with a culture where everybody feels not just like they're contributing to the work that's being done, but that they're learning from it every day and from the people around them. And that dynamic where you feel like your days aren't just spent giving, but you're receiving, that can make all the difference in a sense of purpose, in a sense of loyalty and connection, and to the quality of the work that you do and the life that you live.
And in that environment, people look forward to coming to work on Monday morning.
They do. That's a rarity, but it is absolutely the case. When you enjoy the people that you work with, when they bring something new to your life, not just because they think the same way you do, I mean, especially because they don't think the way you do.
And they're willing to talk about it.
They're willing to talk and connect.
Well, Ben Swire, thank you so much for joining us on Leadership. As we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with this reflection. What safe danger might be waiting for you right now? Not the reckless kind, but the kind that asks you to speak more honestly, listen more deeply, or try something that might not work. Leadership isn't about eliminating risk, it's about choosing the right risks, the ones that lead to connection, purpose, and progress. Ben reminds us that growth rarely feels comfortable, but it almost always feels meaningful in hindsight. So, as you step back into your world of work, consider this. Where have you been protecting yourself when you might be called to be brave? If you found this episode valuable, please share it with your team, your network, or anyone else who's ready to stretch. Be sure to leave a review of our podcast. Even a single sentence fuels the algorithms that promote the great content that the Leadership podcast provides. And for free resources to help you in your leadership journey, go to leadership.net. That's leadership.net. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, stay safe, be happy, and spread good cheer wherever you go. For Leadership, I'm Roger Dean Duncan.